Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Our topic today is reliability in research. The meaning of reliability differs in quantitative and qualitative research paradigms. Today I will explore these concepts separately in the two sections. First, reliability in quantitative research, and then reliability in qualitative research. Reliability in quantitative research is essentially a synonym for dependability, consistency, and replicability over time, over instruments, and over groups of respondents. It is concerned with precision and accuracy. Some features, for example, height, can be measured precisely, while others, for example, musical ability, cannot. So there are three principal types of reliability, and they are stability, number one, number two, equivalence, and number three, internal consistency. So these are three components of reliability, and we are going to discuss them one by one. First of all, the reliability as stability. In this form, reliability is a measure of consistency over time and over similar samples. A reliable instrument for a piece of research will yield similar data from similar respondents over time. In the experimental and survey models of research, this would mean that if a test and then a retest were taken within an appropriate time span, then similar results would be obtained. The researcher has to decide what an appropriate length of time is. Too short a time, and respondents may remember what they said or did in the first test situation. And if too long a time, and there may be extraneous effects operating to distort the data. For example, maturation in students, outside influences on the students, etc. A researcher seeking to demonstrate this type of reliability will have to choose an appropriate time scale between the test and retest. Correlation coefficients can be calculated for reliability of pre-test and post-test using formulae which are readily available in books on statistics and test constructions. In addition to stability over time, reliability as stability can also be stability over a similar sample. For example, we would assume that if we were to administer a test or a questionnaire simultaneously to two groups of students who were very closely matched on significant characteristics such as age, gender, ability, etc. What our characteristics are deemed to have a significant bearing on the responses, then similar results on a test or responses to a questionnaire would be obtained. So there would be stability in the results if there is a stability over a sample. In using the test and retest method, care needs to be taken to ensure the following points. Number one, the time period between the test and retest is not so long that situational factors may change. And number two, the time period between the test and retest is not so short that the participants will remember the first test. And number three, the participants may have become interested in the field and may have followed it up themselves between the test and the retest times. If any of these things happens, it would have an effect on the results of the students, and the test will consider not to be reliable. The second element of the reliability is equivalence. So we just finished about reliability as stability. The results are stable over the time. Now reliability as an equivalence. Within this type of reliability, there are two main sorts. There are two types. Reliability may be achieved first through using equivalent forms. By equivalent forms mean that there are alternative forms of doing this, maybe a test or data gathering instrument. Using different types of data collecting instruments, and by using them or applying them, similar results are found, then it is called reliability as equivalence. If an equivalent form of the test or instrument is devised and it gives similar results, then the instrument can be said to demonstrate this form of reliability. For example, the pre-test and post-test in an experiment are predicated on this type of reliability, being alternate forms of instrument to measure the same issues. This type of reliability, reliability as equivalence, might also be demonstrated if the equivalent forms of a test or other instrument yield consistent results if applied simultaneously to matched samples. For example, a control and experimental group are two random stratified samples in a survey. Here, reliability can be measured through a t-test, through the demonstration of a high correlation coefficient, and through the demonstration of similar means and standard deviations between two groups. Second, reliability as equivalence may be achieved through inter-rater reliability. If more than one researcher is taking part in a piece of research, then human judgment being fallible, agreement between all researchers must be achieved through ensuring that each researcher enters data in the same way. This would be particularly pertinent to a team of researchers collecting structured observations or semi-structured interview data, where each member of the team would have to agree on which data would be entered in which categories. Or if the data is going to be transcribed, so in what form it would be transcribed, or what labels would be used. For observational data, reliability is addressed in the training sessions for researchers where they work on video material to ensure parity in how they enter the data. And the third factor in reliability is reliability as internal consistency, where the test-retest method and the equivalent forms method of demonstrating reliability require the tests or instruments to be done twice. Demonstrating internal consistency demands that the instrument or test be run once only through the split half method. What is a split half method? Let's imagine that a test is to be administered to a group of students. Here the test items are divided into two halves, ensuring that each half is matched in terms of item difficulty and content. Each half is marked separately. If the test is to demonstrate split half reliability, then the marks obtained on each half should be correlated highly with the other. Any student's marks on the one half should match his or her marks on the other half. Reliability thus constructed makes several assumptions. For example, that instrumentation, data, and findings should be controllable, predictable, consistent, and replicable. This presupposes a particular style of research, typically within the positivistic paradigm. Well, these were the three types of reliability in quantitative type of research. That was reliability as stability, and reliability as an equivalence, and reliability as an internal consistency. Now move on to other type of reliability that is used in qualitative research. While we discuss reliability in qualitative research here, the suitability of the term for qualitative type of research is contested. There are a number of researchers who have suggested some other ways to give this concept. For example, Lincoln and Guba, 1985, prefer to replace reliability with terms such as credibility, neutrality, confirmability, dependability, consistency, applicability, trustworthiness, and transferability, in particular the notion of dependability. So instead of using reliability, these synonyms are used in a qualitative term. In the same way, Lecomte and Presley, 1993, suggests that the canons of reliability for quantitative research may be simply unworkable for qualitative type of research. quantitative research assumes the possibility of replication. If the same methods are used with the same sample, then the result should be the same. That is the cornerstone of positivistic or quantitative research. And in typically quantitative methods require a degree of control and manipulation of phenomena. Denson and Lincoln 1994 suggest that reliability as a replicability in qualitative research can be addressed in several ways. First of all, stability of observations. Whether the researcher would have made the same observations and interpretations of these if they had been observed at a different time or in a different place. That is the first condition, stability of observations. Second, parallel forms. Whether the researcher would have made the same observations and interpretations of what had been seen if he or she had paid attention to other phenomena during the observation. And number three, inter-rater reliability. Whether another observer with the same theoretical framework and observing the same phenomena would have interpreted them in the same way. Clearly, this is a contentious issue, for it is seeking to apply to qualitative research the canons of reliability of quantitative research. Well, the purists of the within the paradigm of positivistic approach or a qualitative approach might argue against the legitimacy, relevance, or need for this type of reliability or concerns in qualitative studies. In qualitative research, reliability can be regarded as a fit between what researchers record as data and what actually occurs in the natural setting that is being researched. For example, a degree of accuracy and comprehensiveness of coverage. Let's take the concept of reliability and validity, because these terms are often used together in some of the ways data is collected. First of all, validity and reliability in interviews. How to make the interviews more reliable and valid. Interviews inferences about validity are made too often on the basis of face validity, that is, whether the questions asked looked as if they are measuring what they claim to measure. It is the truthness of the instrument. One way of validating interview measures is to compare the interview measure with another measure that has already been shown to be valid. This kind of comparison is known as convergent validity, and we discussed in our previous lecture on validity in research. Well, if the two measures agree, it can be assumed that the validity of the interview is comparable with the proven validity of the other measure. Perhaps the most practical way of achieving greater validity is to minimize the amount of bias as much as possible. The sources of bias are the characteristics of the interview, the characteristics of the respondent, and the substantive content of the questions. More particularly, these will include: number 1, the attitudes, opinions, and expectations of the interviewer. Number 2, a tendency for the interviewer to see the respondent in his or her own image. And number 3, a tendency for the interviewer to seek answers that support preconceived notions. And number 4, misperceptions on the part of the interviewer of what the respondent is saying. And number 5, misunderstandings on the part of the respondent of what is being said. Studies have also shown that race, religion, sexual orientation, gender, status, social class, and age in certain contexts can be potent sources of bias. For example, interview effects, and reported in the research by Lee 1993 and Shaurich 1995. Interviews and interviewees alike bring their own, often unconscious, experiential and biographical baggage with them into the interview situation. Hitchcock and Hughes 1989 argue that because interviews are interpersonal, humans interacting with humans, it is inevitable that the researcher will have some influence on the interviewee and thereby on the data. And Lee 1993 indicates the problems of conducting interviews perhaps at their sharpest, where the researcher is researching sensitive subjects, that is, research that might pose a significant threat to those involved, be they interviewers or interviewees. So one way of controlling for reliability is to have a highly structured interview with the same format and sequence of words and questions for each respondent. Though Shaurich suggests that this is to misread the infinite complexity and open-endedness of social interaction. And Silverman 1993 suggests that it is important for each interviewee to understand the question in the same way. He suggests that the reliability of interviews can be enhanced by careful piloting of interview schedules, training of interviewers, inter-rate reliability in the coding of responses, and the extended use of closed type of questions. On the other hand, he argues for the importance of open-ended interviews, as this enables respondents to demonstrate their unique way of looking at the world, their definition of the situation. It recognizes that what is a suitable sequence of questions for one respondent might be less suitable for another, and open-ended questions enable important but unanticipated issues to be raised. Oppenheim 1992 suggests several causes of bias in interviewing. So, what are those biases or potential biases in interviews, and they should be handled properly to achieve reliability. First, it would be bias sampling. And what does it mean? Sometimes created by the researcher not adhering to sampling instructions. Number 2, poor rapport between interviewer and interviewee. And number 3, changes to question wording, attitudinal and factual questions. Number 4, poor prompting and biased probing. And number 5, poor use and management of sport material, show cards, etc. Number 6, alterations to the sequence of questions. And number 7, inconsistent coding of responses. Number 8, selective or interpreted recording of data or transcripts. And number 9, poor handling of difficult interviews. They all lead to unreliability or make it less reliable. These are the factors. So hence reducing bias becomes more than simply careful formulation of questions so that the meaning is crystal clear. Thorough training procedures so that an interviewer is more aware of the possible problems. Probability sampling of respondents, and sometimes matching interviewer characteristics with those of the sample being interviewed. Well, 1996 suggests that a skilled interviewer should do the following to improve the effectiveness of this tool as a research collecting method. The interviewer should know the subject matter in order to conduct an informed conversation. Structure the interview well so that each stage of the interview is clear to the participant. Be clear in the terminology and coverage of the material allowed. Be clear in the terminology and coverage of the material. Allow participants to take their time and answer in their own way. Be sensitive and empathetic, using active listening and being sensitive to how something is said and the non-verbal communication involved. Be alert to those aspects of the interview which may hold significance for the participant. Keep to the point and the matter in hand, steering the interview where necessary in order to address this. Check the reliability, validity, and consistency of responses by well-placed questioning. Be able to recall and refer to earlier statements made by the participant. Be able to clarify, confirm, and modify the participant's comments with the participant. Well, these are some of the measures, if they are taken, the reliability of the interview as a research tool collecting data can be improved and its reliability could be achieved. Now we move on to another type of data collection, and the issue of reliability related with that one. So that is reliability in experiments. The fundamental purpose of an experimental design study is to impose control over conditions that would otherwise cloud the true effects of the independent variables upon the dependent variables. The following summary is adapted from Campbell and Stanley and Braxton Glass and Louis Beck. Distinguish between internal and external validity. Internal validity is concerned with the question, do the experimental treatments in fact make a difference in the specific experiments under scrutiny? And external validity, on the other hand, asks the question, given these demonstrable effects, to what population or settings can they be generalized? Well, there are certain threats to internal validity in case of experiments. First of all, its history. Frequently in educational research, events other than the experimental treatments occur during the time between pre-test and post-test observations. Number 2, maturation. Between any two observations, subjects change in a variety of ways, and such changes can produce differences that are independent of the experimental treatments. Then there is a statistical regression. Like maturation effects, regression effects increase systematically with the time interval between pre-test and post-test. Regression means simply that subjects scoring highest on a pre-test are likely to score relatively lower on a post-test. And conversely, those scoring lowest on a pre-test are likely to score relatively higher on a post-test. Then it is testing. Pre-tests at the beginning of experiments can produce effects other than those due to the experimental treatments. Another threat to the internal validity is the instrumentation. Unreliable tests or instruments can introduce serious errors into experiments. Then there is a selection. Bias may be introduced as a result of differences in the selection of subjects for the comparison groups, or when intact classes are employed as experimental or control groups. Another threat to internal validity is experimental mortality. The loss of subjects through dropout often occurs in long-running experiments and may result in confounding the effects of the experimental variables. But whereas initially the groups may have been randomly selected, the residue that stays the course is likely to be different from the unbiased sample that began it. Another threat is instrument reactivity, which means the effects the instruments of the study exert on the people in the study. And finally, selection maturation interaction. This can occur where there is a confusion between the research design effects and the variables effects. In the same way, there are certain threats to external validity. Threats to external validity are likely to limit the degree to which generalizations can be made from the particular experimental conditions to other populations or settings. I've produced a summary with reference to some of the works by Campbell and Stanley 1963, Brecht and Glass 1968, Hammersley and Atkinson 1983, and Woolemi 1990, and Louis Beck 1993. They jeopardize external validity. They have written about the threats to external validity and what are they. Some of the points. Number one, failure to describe independent variables explicitly. Number two, lack of representativeness of available and target population. And number three, inadequate operationalizing of dependent variables. And number four, sensitization or reactivity to experimental conditions. And number five, invalidity or unreliability of instruments. So by way of summary, we have seen that an experiment can be said to be internally valid to the extent that with its own confines its results are credible. But for those results to be useful, they must be generalizable beyond the confines of the particular experiment. That was about validity in experimental type of research. Now we move on to validity and reliability in questionnaire type of data collection. Validity of questionnaires can be seen from two viewpoints. First, whether respondents who complete questionnaires do so accurately, honestly, and correctly. And second, whether those who fail to return their questionnaires would have given the same distribution of answers as did the returnees. The question of accuracy can be checked by means of the intensive interview method, a technique consisting of 12 principal tactics that include familiarization, temporal reconstruction, probing, and challenging. And if you are interested to explore more about these points, I recommend Belson 1986. The problem of non-response in the questionnaires and the issue of volunteer bias, as Belson calls it, can in part be checked on and controlled for, particularly when the postal questionnaire is sent out on a continuous basis. It involves follow-up contact with non-respondents by means of interviewers trained to secure interviews with such people. A comparison is then made between the replies of respondents and non-respondents. Further, Hudson and Miller, 1997, suggests several strategies for maximizing the response rate to postal questionnaires and thereby to increase reliability. And they involve how to get the questionnaires back and improve their reliability. They can be summarized in significant points in the summary are including stamp address envelopes. Whenever you send a questionnaire, and if it is a postal questionnaire, you must send self-stamped address and envelope with this. Number 2, organize multiple rounds of follow-up to request returns. Then stressing the importance and benefits of the questionnaire, and stressing the importance and benefits to the client group being targeted. Providing interim data from returns to non-returners to involve and engage them in research. Checking addresses and changing them if necessary. Following up questionnaires with a personal telephone call. Tailoring follow-up requests to individuals rather than just writing a blanket generalized letters. Detailing features of the questionnaire itself, that it's writing about its ease of completion, time to be spent, sensitivity of the questions asked, length of the questionnaire. Issuing invitations to follow-up interview face-to-face or by telephone. Providing encouragement to participate by a friendly third party. And understanding the nature of the sample population in depth so that effective targeting strategies can be used. So these are some of the strategies which can be applied to get the data through the questions back. Because the problem with the questionnaire is that if they are sent by post, there is a little response rate. So how to improve the one, these points are related to the one which can boost it up and give the better results if followed properly. The advantages of the questionnaire over interviews, for instance, are it tends to be more reliable because it is anonymous. It encourages greater honesty. It is more economical than the interview in terms of time and money, and there is the possibility that it can be mailed. Its disadvantages on the other hand are there is often too low a percentage of returns. The interviewer is unable to answer questions concerning both the purpose of the interview and any misunderstandings experienced by the interviewee. For it sometimes happens in the case of the latter, the same questions have different meanings for different people. If only close items are used, the questionnaire may lack coverage or authenticity. If only open items are used, respondents may be unwilling to write their answers for one reason or another. Questionnaires present problems to people of limited literacy because they can't write. And an interview can be conducted at an appropriate speed, whereas questionnaires are often filled in hurriedly. So there is a need to pilot questionnaires and refine their contents, wording, length, as appropriate for the sample being targeted. One central issue in considering the reliability and validity of questionnaire surveys is that of sampling. An unrepresentative, skewed sample, one that is too small or too large, can easily distort the data, and indeed, in the case of very small samples, prohibit statistical analysis. Okay, now move on to the test as a research collecting tools and their reliability. The researcher will have to judge the place and significance of test data, not forgetting the problem of the Hawthorne effect operating negatively or positively on students who have to undertake the test. There is a range of issues which might affect the reliability of the test. For example, the time of day, the time of the school year, the temperature in the test room or examination hall, the perceived importance of the test, the degree of formality of the test situation, examination nerves, the amount of guessing of answers by the students, the calculation of standard error which the test demonstrates features, the way that the test is administered, the way that the test is marked, the degree of closure or openness of test items. Hence, the researcher who is considering using testing as a way of acquiring research data must ensure that it is appropriate, valid, and reliable. And to make it reliable, think about overcoming these issues. Feld and Brennan 1993 suggest 4 types of threat to reliability. Number 1, individuals, their motivation, concentration, forgetfulness, health, carelessness, guessing, their related skills, for example, reading ability, their usefulness to solving the type of problem set, the effects of practice. Number 2, situational factors, the psychological and physical conditions for the test, the context. Test marker factors, idiosyncrasy and subjectivity, and instrument variables, poor domain sampling, errors in sampling tasks, the realism of the task, and relatedness to the experience of the testees, poor question items, the assumption or extent of unidimensionality in item response theory, length of the test, mechanical errors, scoring errors, computer errors, all make it unreliable. So there are certain sources of unreliability, and there are several threats to reliability in tests and examinations, particularly tests of performance and achievement. With respect to examiner and markers, Cunningham noticed some of them. For example, errors in marking, attributing, editing, and transfer of marks. Number 2, inter-rater reliability. Different markers are examiners giving different marks for the same or similar piece of work. Inconsistency in the marker, for example, being harsh in the early stages of marking and lenient in the later stages of the marking of manuscripts, make it unreliable. variations in the award of grades. For work that is close to grade boundaries, some markers may place the score in a higher or lower category than other markers. And the halo effect, which means a student who is judged to do well or badly in one assessment is given undeserved favorable or unfavorable assessment respectively in other areas. With reference to the students and teachers themselves, there are several sources of unreliability. For example, motivation and interest in the task have a considerable effect on performance. Clearly, students need to be motivated if they are going to make a serious attempt at any test that they are required to undertake. Where motivation is intrinsic, doing something for its own sake, or extrinsic, doing something for an external reason, for example, obtaining a certificate or employment or entry into higher education. The results of a test completed in a desultory fashion by resentful pupils are hardly likely to supply the students' teachers with reliable information about the students' capabilities. So motivation to participate in test-taking sessions is strongest when students have been helped to see its purpose and where the examiner maintains a warm, purposeful attitude towards them during the testing session. Another concept related with increasing the reliability of the tests or exams is the moderation strategy. Harlan advocates the use of a range of moderation strategies both before and after the test, including statistical reference or scaling tests, inspection of samples by post or by visit, group moderation of grades, post hoc adjustment of marks, accreditation of institutions, visits of verifiers, agreement panels, defining marking criteria, exemplification, group moderation meetings. These are all strategies which can improve the reliability of the test. And with regard to validity, it is important to note here that an effective test will adequately ensure the following: its content validity, adequate and representative coverage of programmed and test objectives in the test items, a key feature of sampling we discussed in one of our previous lectures. This is achieved by ensuring that the content of the test fairly samples the class or fields of the situations or subject matter in question. So content validity is achieved by making professional judgments about the relevance and sampling of the contents of the test to a particular domain. It is concerned with coverage and representativeness rather than with patterns of response or scores. And mostly it is a matter of judgment rather than measurement. So that was about the reliability in research, and that reliability with reference to different types of data collection instruments and how to make them reliable was our topic, and we discussed number of issues related with each type of instrument. Well, the two concepts, that is the validity and reliability, are the most fundamental questions which will be asked about any type of research. And validity means is truthfulness. What claim you are making in your research, is it valid? And we discussed in a separate lecture on different types of validity in research. And today we discuss the other term, that is reliable. And by reliable, we started with reliability in quantitative type of research or positivistic type of research. But it can also be used in a qualitative type of research, though some of the researchers won't agree with the term reliability. They have suggested a number of other terms which capture the true idea, like transferability, dependability, etc. Well, in both paradigms, the purpose is to reach the truth and present the results as accurately, objectively, and consistently as it is possible. So, if you want that your research should be valid and reliable, you have to take note of some of the issues and solutions presented here. And especially when you design your research, you keep in your mind that how are you going to make your research valid and reliable. So that's for today. We have almost reached the end of the session. Thank you very much for listening. Until the next session, goodbye.